Hi, you're in class with Dr. T.
Hi guys, today I want to talk about Nilo Procopio Peçanha. He was born in 1867 in Rio de Janeiro. Nilo Procopio Peçanha was president of Brazil for roughly 17 months and is considered the first president of African ancestry. He was known for starting technological advances in his country, particularly in the area of infrastructure and also in education. He was born of very humble origins. His father was a baker. His mother helped the bakery and take care of their 7 children. It was on his mother's side that his Afro ancestry flowed from. His father was purportedly of Italian ancestry. The documentation says he was called the mestizo from the Morro do Coco, and this alluded to his color and the fact that he was a light-skinned black person or mulatto. It was said that he did not acknowledge his African ancestry. And remember, he was born in 1867, so 1867 was a moment in which slavery still existed in Brazil. Slavery only ends in Brazil in 1888. And so there was a lot of discrimination against people of African ancestry, and they were considered kind of second-tier citizens, even if they were not enslaved. So he comes from this very humble origin, but nonetheless, because he was born free and from a free family, he did have access to a public education. And we remember in the late 19th century, there were very few schools, but he was able to study, and to the point where he actually would go on to law school, first in Sao Paulo and in Recife. There were very few colleges in the late 19th century Brazil. So it's anyone who went to college was considered an elite. In fact, over 2/3 of the population was not only poorly educated, but was illiterate, right? So you're dealing in a society that overwhelmingly was illiterate. So he was, just by his education alone, an elite. But one of the ways in which we can see discrimination happening to even someone of his stature was the fact when he chose his bride, Ana Castro Belisario de Souza, known as Anita. This marriage was not looked upon as something that was positive or good. Anita's family came from aristocrats, and they were from the royal family. They were considered elites, and they were, of course, of European ancestry. So this poor guy, poor financially I'm talking about, and of African ancestry, was seen as a big taboo. And Anita's mother did not like the idea that she was marrying this guy and protested the marriage all the way into the end. She never accepted the marriage. It was also the fact of many of the other family members, because of his race and because of his class, right? But it is important to note that this did not affect Nilo Peçanha's ability to rise up politically. Although limited people had access to voting, in Brazil, we have to remember, more than 2/3 of the country by the late 19th century was of African ancestry. They were not able to vote because also 2/3 of the country was illiterate. In order to vote, you had to be literate. Also, women were not allowed to vote. So the vast majority of the population was excluded from the ballot. And it's only a small elite group of people who had access to voting and hence politics in general in Brazil. Nilo, nonetheless, still was elected governor of Rio de Janeiro. He also was a senator. He started out as a state congressman, right? And he was very popular as a politician. As a governor, he was very effective in maintaining financial solvency for the state. Also, he was able to engage in a variety of infrastructure programs, which included widening the streets and avenues of Rio de Janeiro. He was involved in the gas, changing the city from a gas to electrical city. He introduced the electric tram in the city, so all the uses of modern technology. He was engaged in early in the early 20th century and late 19th century. In 1906, he would be elected as vice president under Alfonso Peña. But Alfonso Peña would tragically die in 1909, and this allowed Nilo Peçanha to become president of Brazil. As president, he continued his interest in infrastructure, and he also engaged in expanding roles of government. He started a Ministry of Agriculture, which becomes an important position in Brazil. He also started the Indian Protection Service, which was the first time that there was a government response to dealing with the indigenous populations of Brazil. And he also started something very important as far as education, is providing schools for training and skills and trades. He invests in his limited time as president. Again, he's only president for 17 months, and investing in railroad networks, in expanding roads in Brazil. So he is very, again, interested in education and infrastructure as president. When he steps down as president, he will return to the Senate, and then in 1970 he becomes Minister of the Foreign Affairs. And this was 1917, was during the First World War, and he actually would be aligned with the Allies, so he was on the right side of history against the Central Powers in World War I. In 1918, he again was elected to the Senate, but then in 1921, he tries to run again for president, and a reaction against the oligarchs. He wants to widen political opportunity to other regions because only 2 or 3 states in Brazil really had political power. He fails, and he retires, and in 1924 he's going to pass away. Now, how do we analyze his presidency? How do we analyze his life? Well, in reality, Nilo Peçanha is a conservative liberal. He was an abolitionist early on, so he was against slavery. He also wanted to promote education. He promoted infrastructure for the country, but he did not radically change anything for people of African ancestry in Brazil. During his era, nothing radically changed. Most African people would remain as second-class citizens. They were not allowed to really participate in society because most Africans, people of African ancestry in Brazil, were not literate. So they did not have the right or the ability to vote in Brazil. And little changed under his time. So he died in 1924. Nothing really had radically changed for people of African ancestry. It isn't really until the 1970s and 1980s that you start to see the beginning of change and more inclusion of Afro-Brazilians. And to this day, it still remains a struggle. But we can say that Nilo was an exceptional character in Brazilian history, particularly someone who did have to go through racism. It's interesting to see how he fought against it, at least on the individual level, and somewhat how he tried to create, from his perspective, a more inclusive Brazil, right? Thank you.